What's going on, everybody? Welcome back into the Brenden Schaeffer Fantasy Football channel. As today we've got a little bit of time on a Saturday, we're going to run a quick mock draft here. 12-team PPR, pretty standard settings. I've set the draft clock to about 90 seconds instead of 2 minutes. Try to challenge myself to get through these picks a little bit more quickly, but I figured the more mocks we can run, the more prepared we are for fantasy football draft season, and that's the name of the game on this channel. So, if you enjoy fantasy football content, if you want to see a variety of mock drafts between now and the beginning of the fantasy football season, this is a place to be. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, click that subscribe button, click like on this video, and comment below with what type of drafts you would like to see. What types of mocks do you want me to run in this fantasy football channel? Do you play in 14-team leagues, 10-team leagues? Maybe it's a 16-team league. I do one of those. I want to be able to do a variety of mock draft styles so that people can get a feel for what those look like. And as we get more and more going with this channel, have more subscribers, have more people potentially to choose from that can join me doing these mock drafts, so I won't always be mocking against the computer on Sleeper. But for right now, Sleeper does a great job of giving us these reps and these opportunities to get better, get more accustomed to what to expect in these drafts. And so we're going to go ahead and get started. Last video on the channel, did this a couple of days ago, basically the same settings, but I did half-point PPR for that video, and I drafted from the number 3 spot. Today I'm going to do it a little bit differently. I'm going to go back toward the turn, not all the way on the turn, but I'm going to go from the 11 spot, and we'll kind of see what that ends up looking like here. So let's kick the draft off, get started. Whoa, a little bit loud there. Big-time run on wide receivers after Christian McCaffrey at 101. It's interesting to see Tyreek Hill going before Jamar Chase. I don't know if I'll expect that in the real draft season. And Cooper Kupp's landing spot will be interesting as well. I drafted Cooper Kupp 101 in several of my leagues where I had the chance to do so last season. And I did mean to go 90 seconds on the draft clock. So let's fix that real quick. Drafted a lot of Cooper Kupp 101 last year. For me, it was him or Justin Jefferson, and I kind of split the difference on it last year. I'm very much in PPR leagues in favor of going wide receiver at the top of a draft when you've got elite options like Jefferson, like Jamar Chase, and that's probably going to be the strategy I'll take this year. But we're going from the back half here. We're going from the 11 spot. So let's take a look. What wide receivers are available? I think there are some compelling options. We could end up stacking 2 wide receivers right here at the 11 spot. Maybe it's a CeeDee Lamb and an Amon-Ra St. Brown. I'm high on the passing offense potential in Detroit this season. A.J. Brown, I think, is going to have another really strong season. Would be compelling to maybe get him on board. I have to figure, though, that between Lamb and Brown, I'm only going to get one of them. That has to be my expectation. Saquon Barkley probably goes. Nick Chubb could be really interesting. Normally, even with this setting where I've got it set for 2 wide receivers in your lineup and 2 flexes, I'm still going to plan to put wide receivers in those flex spots when it comes to a PPR league. But, boy, because there are some really compelling options here, Nick Chubb, I wouldn't mind going on the back half of this. I really like CeeDee Lamb. A little bit concerned, though. Brian Schottenheimer in Dallas, I don't think is an upgrade in terms of offensive coordinator for that Cowboys offense. I'm kind of torn here on what I want to do at wide receiver. I'm going to go A.J. Brown. I'm going to take my shot with him, and not a surprise that CeeDee Lamb goes the very next pick. It's dealer's choice at this point. It's fun to kind of experiment with different builds. Maybe now that I think a little bit more on it, I probably would have preferred to go CeeDee Lamb there because there are some circumstances where a little bit further down, Devontae Smith might be available to me, say if he makes it all the way to the 311 turn, which I don't think is likely, so it's not going to come into play necessarily, but that's a guy that I would be targeting as well and don't want to double up on Eagles. But we went A.J. Brown. You can't really go wrong there. Now, maybe another wide receiver. Amon-Ra St. Brown is compelling. I like Jalen Waddle. I like Garrett Wilson a lot with Aaron Rodgers. Devontae Adams, a little bit concerned about the quarterback change there in Vegas, and maybe the drop-off could come for Tay, but again, that's a guy you can't really go wrong with either. Nick Chubb, though, is compelling to me. I think Nick Chubb, some rumors coming out that he could maybe be more involved in the passing game. Nothing really on Sleeper to look at in terms of latest news, but that's always something good to check if you're drafting on Sleeper, if there's anything you can come up with there. I'm not overlooking Derrick Henry, but it's like at this point, you could see the other shoe drop on his career with him getting up there in age. Derrick Henry is always a guy I'd like to trade for every season because is he going to be still kind of that workhorse back? We don't really know until we get into the year. Boy, I'm going to try to grab Nick Chubb here. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to split the difference. Normally, like I said, like to go wide receiver, but I've talked previously in these videos about how I like to challenge myself in mock drafts to do things that make me uncomfortable. And so we'll do that here. We'll get that Nick Chubb running back. Not super high on the Cleveland offense, but I think Chubb is going to have a really good year as a focal point there in Cleveland. So we'll go ahead and split the difference with our first two picks, go wide receiver, running back. Taking a look at the board now, the second round, you start to see the quarterbacks fly off. That's not all too unusual. I do believe Patrick Mahomes should be the first quarterback off the board. Josh Allen, you can't really go wrong there. Jalen Hurts squeaking into the second round as well. I continue to believe that Mark Andrews is a value at where he's going in these mock drafts. I mean, if he's early third, I'm all over that. I'm really high on him being able to be 90%, 95% of Travis Kelce's production, and the round value difference, I think, between their two draft costs is going to be very juicy. And then you could potentially find yourself, if you are an early quarterback drafter, maybe being able to stack with Lamar Jackson, but here you see Lamar go 3.9, so that would not have been an option. Let's go ahead and take a look at the board a little more closely. Deebo Samuel could be a compelling wide receiver too. But here's the thing about why I love to go wide receiver heavy in the early portion of drafts. Imagine we went A.J. Brown or CeeDee Lamb, and then we go Amon-Ra, or we go Garrett Wilson, or we go Devontae Adams, and then we can come back with Deebo as our 3. Man, that would have been a really interesting situation. And it makes you weaker at running back, but I like the mid-round running back values this season. But I'm talking a lot. I got to make a decision here quickly. I'm not in love with Deebo Samuel necessarily as my 2, but I still think the talent's there. I still think he's at a good enough age where he can continue to provide value. Don't love that 2 running backs fly off the board right after that because Kenneth Walker and Jahmyr Gibbs were guys that I would have been interested in. And again, this is why sometimes I love being able to go wide receiver early because your roster just feels so different if Deebo's your 3 at wide receiver compared to your 2. And again, this is a PPR setting. And so I am always thinking about the receptions and how I can take an advantage of that setting in my lineup. But if I hadn't gone Nick Chubb and I'm suddenly going Deebo at wide receiver 3, or maybe I'm going Amon-Ra, St. Brown, and A.J. Brown, I feel a lot better about saying, well, I love Kenneth Walker. I love Jahmyr Gibbs, especially for PPR in Gibbs' case. That maybe would have made me feel a little bit better about the roster because I don't love these running backs. Aaron Jones could have a good season, but there's risk there with a new quarterback in town. Not into Joe Mixon this year. I think J.K. Dobbins could be back to full health and be a pretty talented guy, but I don't necessarily love that the offense, I think, is moving more toward a passing-oriented offense, again, with Lamar Jackson at the helm, new offensive coordinator there in Baltimore. So now I'm looking at me, and it just seems like a kind of a dead spot on the board. And I think I've forced myself into this spot because of taking Chubb where I did. Otherwise, I think the board would be falling a lot more favorably in my direction. I've taken DJ Moore's shares previously. I'm going to take another one here because the clock was winding down, and I had to make a choice. But man, do I not love the value in the 4th round. If Jahmyr Gibbs falls to me at 4.2, feel much differently about this draft. It's not necessarily that I think Gibbs is going to just be a workhorse dominator, but in PPR, I think Gibbs is going to get enough touches and be efficient enough to really be a force there. And it's just like I like the value and the idea of some of these guys in round 5, like Christian Watson at 5.7, great value to me. Value of Justin Fields, it feels great here, but I don't think at 4.2 it was necessarily a good spot to go that route. Maybe could have gone with like a Joe Burrow there, but I don't love to be able to take quarterbacks early and waste an early pick when I could be stocking up at other premium positions. So what I'm finding so far is that I don't really like drafting on the turn. And it's a good thing to know because in some league scenarios, you get to pick or have a say in your draft spot. And I just, at least right now, the way this draft is unfolded, I don't really like this. I got good players, but if I'm going into a draft, I don't think Deebo Samuel is like a must-have target for me. DJ Moore is not necessarily either, but I trust him more than the wide receivers that were on the board, right? Hopkins, Keenan Allen getting up there in age. Not huge, like I said, on the Deshaun Watson offense like some people, so not really into Amari Cooper. Ridley is interesting, but now we've almost got a full value of round difference that I would have been sacrificing to take Ridley at 4.2. So I don't know. That's interesting that I'm finding that I'm not in love with the way this draft has unfolded so far. And here's another place that it gets me. I think DeAndre Swift would be a nice guy to target at the early fifth portion of the draft. But I don't really feel like I can do that because of the fact that I've already got the Eagle at the top. And maybe I'm overthinking that, right? A lot of people would say, hey, that's an explosive offense. You want as many pieces of it as you can get. But I like to diversify personally. So I grabbed Chris Godwin, another guy that I'm not really too enthralled by because of the quarterback situation in Tampa. But I do think he's the most talented wide receiver there. I prefer him over Mike Evans. I don't know where Evans' draft cost is going to be. He's still on the board here, listed a little bit lower. And so we've got a very interesting mix right now. Kind of a little older at wide receiver. I prefer emerging talent, but we got Debo. I think DJ Moore, I didn't talk a lot about him, but I think Justin Fields getting a weapon like that and DJ Moore being a guy that's always produced numbers with lesser quarterbacks, I think you give DJ Moore 8 to 10 touchdowns and he ends up really thriving for fantasy this year. So I like him, but he's not a mega target of mine. But boy, we're just finding it difficult from the back half of this draft board to find guys we're really in love with. DeAndre Swift is still sitting there. I'm not going to pass on him here because I do think there is a little bit of a tier break. Javonte Williams feels rather low, but with the injury situation there, I think there's a little bit of a gap still between Swift and him. I'm going to take DeAndre Swift. I am going to double up on Eagles because in the 6th round, I just feel like the value is too good. As we see 3 tight ends falling off the board right after our pick of Swift, that's the first time we've really felt good about getting value and feeling like we weren't reaching or just taking the guy that was the best available at the position, even if we weren't enthralled by the player. So we like that. We like finally being able to get a pick we feel pretty good about. And you look at our running back situation, to have Swift on the Eagles, which I think he's going to be really good. They're really efficient. And Chubb, I think that's a really good running back duo. The wide receivers we have, I'm not personally enthralled by, but I think we've got name value on all 4 of these guys to where early on in the season, if they have a spike week, like if Chris Godwin has a big week in week 1 or week 2, say, I think you can flip him for maybe somebody else with a little bit more stability and upside at the same position. Those are the types of trades I look to make early on in a fantasy season. All right, now we're looking at still empty at quarterback and tight end. Starting to fill out our bench, and we always strive for upside on the bench when we do. There's nobody at quarterback that I'm really enthralled by, so we're still looking to wait at that position. I just think there's so much. Like, we're fine with a Jared Goff late. We're fine with taking a flyer on Bryce Young late, and just kind of Matt Stafford. I think could be perfectly fine if healthy. So we're not going to prioritize quarterback. Tight end is a wasteland, so we don't really care about that. Let's start filling out our bench with upside. Treylon Burks is a great example. Jordan Addison, great example. You can't really go wrong with either of those guys. Kind of intrigued by Antonio Gibson, but could see going Zach Charbonnet a little bit later as well. Burks or Addison, it's a toss-up. I'm going to go Treylon in this case. I think he could be the wide receiver 1 for that team, whereas we know Addison's going to be capped as the wide receiver 2 for Minnesota. But I am enthralled by Addison. I could potentially go him right here as well. But we do have 5 wide receivers now, so we could look for a little more balance. Antonio Gibson, I like the idea of the way he's been talked up in camp. Antonio Gibson could be a matchup nightmare in 2023 per head coach. You kind of have to decide whether you're going to buy into some of the hype on certain guys or not. A lot of stuff you read in the summer is going to be fluff. But I do see a world in which if they use Gibson as a pass catcher like they ought to, that he could be a value for PPR. And I feel like they don't have a ton of other weapons. Like McLaurin's a good dude there, Jahan Dotson. So maybe that's not fair. But if they're getting hyped about Antonio Gibson again, could be an effective playmaker for the Commanders, according to The Athletic. Yeah, sure. I'll buy into a little bit of the hype here when we're doing a mock draft and I'm in the 8th round. We're looking for a running back. I think there's more PPR upside in Gibson than in Brian Robinson. He just doesn't catch the football. Charbonnet is probably right behind Gibson, and on a different day, I might take Zach because I think he's the pass-catching running back in that Seattle offense. I like A.J. Dillon, but I'm not high enough on the Packers offense to take that shot right now. So we'll go Antonio Gibson. We'll say it's going to be a a bounce back for him after a little bit of an uncertain season that he had in 2022. I think if they use him like a pass catcher, he could be interesting. Taking a look at some of the guys coming off the board now. We see Watson go, Tua go. More tight ends. I just don't like the value on tight end in these rounds. This guy needed Evan Ingram, so that's a fair pick. But Njoku, I just don't think, if you've got George Kittle, maybe you're worried about injury, but I just don't think that's a spot that you need to think about it. We do maybe consider going tight end with one of our next two picks because we know Team 1, Team 2 don't have a tight end yet, and so they probably will go there. Team 7 will pick twice before we get to pick again because of the turn situation. So we'll take a peek at tight end. But again, I just don't really care that much. You excited about Dalton Schultz? You excited about Dalton Kincaid? Not really. Not too thrilled about the Daltons to where I have to burn a premium pick. We're still in the 9th round here, so there's value. Quarterback, let's kind of take a look at that because the CPU can often go a little bit nutso taking backup QBs. Everybody's got one so far, so if they don't go crazy, we're probably safe, but I think they probably will. But like I said, Jared Goff, I don't really care. I'm going to wait on quarterback. Let's take a quick look. We're down to 30 seconds on the clock. It's good to talk through these things and think about it. We're getting closer to the end of this draft. We've got 3 bench spots left to fill. We still do have quarterback and tight end, but this is not unusual for me in the way I go about things. I'm taking Cortland Sutton, noticing him at the top of the board. This is the 9th round. Again, he was a guy that was hyped up as maybe a round 4, round 5 guy last year. As a result of Russell Wilson being bad, he didn't really end up panning out. Had some injuries too, if I recall correctly. But Cortland Sutton in the 9th round, I think, could end up being one of the best values in fantasy this year. It's minimal risk. He's a bench stash for our roster. We don't need him. But I could see toe-to-toe, week-to-week, him playing his way into out-producing Chris Godwin or getting into a lineup, depending on matchup, over DJ Moore. I really like the value on Cortland Sutton. It's free. He's basically free. It's all the context of what you're paying to get a guy, and I just think there's a lot of value there. Running back, we still want one more running back. I like having 4 of them going into a season, 5 if it makes sense per my roster, and I'm always going to be looking for rookie running backs at this portion of the draft. And on Sleeper, you can even sort it that way, which I'll do. Kendre Miller is a guy that I'm going to probably aim for in this area, especially with the uncertainty surrounding Alvin Kamara's situation from a legal standpoint. If he gets suspended for some games, Kendre Miller could get some run right out of the gate. I like Roschon Johnson, but I think he probably gets picked up before like round 12. We're going to go here round 10 and 11. So right now, as of where I like Elijah Mitchell. I mean, that you could definitely trade him to the McCaffrey owner if things go wrong on that front. I'm probably going Kendre Miller here unless I see something I really like. Jameson Williams, I'd love to stash and pick up. But we're going to take Kendre Miller because, I got this wrong. We're not picking until 11-11. So we're going to have a whole round. Might have done that a little bit differently if I had realized that. And that's just my own fault trying to talk through this draft too quickly. Jameson Williams, I think, is fine to stash. I love upside on the bench, and I trust my ability to fill out a roster week to week, fill out a lineup week to week for 6 weeks while he's out. That might have been the pick. But we like having a 4th running back, Kendre Miller. We feel good about that. There's upside there. If he has no role, you can always drop him. But I think that's an interesting stash. So we'll see kind of how that plays out. We do, unfortunately, see Okonkwo and Kincaid go off the board. Those are 2 tight ends that at this point I would have taken a shot on in the 11th. Now we're kind of looking at Sam Laporta probably, and we may have to hit him before the end of the 12th round just because of the upside guys. That's the one that I do feel kind of interesting about. Let's take a look anywhere else on the board that has some value. Quarterback might be kind of time to take our shot. This is a spot where I like to look at if I have any stacks I could potentially manifest, but I don't have any Lions on the board. But I did mention I was going to be looking at Laporta. That's a sneaky late stack. I know stacks are more prominent in best ball, but I kind of like to have it just in what if my pass catcher ends up exceeding expectations to make my quarterback a better option. That's something that I always am intrigued to do. Probably don't see Goff go off the board here between the next 2 picks. But that being said, I'm into Sky Moore a little bit. We're going to take Jared Goff and see what happens, see what falls to us. And Laporta goes. That's brutal. That is the epitome of brutality. Yeah, so in retrospect, you go Laporta first if he was the guy that, like I said, was the last interesting player to me. and Jared Goff. The whole stack is the reason we took Goff. So we got kind of sniped there. That was probably the saddest moment of the draft. We're going to take Sky Moore, wrap this thing up with a tight end when we get to the bottom. I like having a piece of the Kansas City passing offense. We have no idea who it's going to be in that offense this season. And so I think I'll end up with a lot of Sky Moore if he ends up available in the 12th and 13th rounds. Rashee Rice is another guy that goes there in the 13th. Similar situation when it comes to just taking a shot on a young guy in KC. Michael Mayer would have been my pick if he hadn't gone one before me. So we truly are in bleak territory at tight end. But again, it doesn't matter. Stream the position if you go this late. We'll take Taysom Hill for the lulls. He could end up getting some use, getting some run. But that's our mock draft. Let's run it down. Jared Goff at quarterback. Again, you can stream the quarterback position. There are plenty of guys. I don't think Matt Stafford got taken, did he? No. So that's a guy that's on waivers that I could absolutely plug in. If he reestablishes with Cooper Kupp, both of those guys healthy, you're in a great spot with him. So wait on quarterback unless you get one in the first few rounds. Like the last one that I really think is worth paying on is Fields. I could be wrong, and the actual answer is Lawrence, but you can see a little bit of a gap between Lawrence and Fields, round and a half difference, and then it truly drops off. So if you're not getting Lawrence in the mid-6th, just don't bother. I could see if Richardson gets into the 10th or something, you want to chase the upside there. Otherwise, just don't bother at quarterback. I don't think it's worth it. The mistake I made in this draft was Jared Goff here. I didn't need to do that. I could have gone Laporta. I just didn't think about it. I didn't think Laporta would go, but that's a good learning experience. Where are we at running back? Nick Chubb, DeAndre Swift, I think are two great options. I think getting Nick Chubb to kind of stabilize that grouping, and then having a guy with the upside of a DeAndre Swift in that offense for the Eagles is really fun. And if you have a really robust roster that ends up being so deep, you have guys on your bench that end up hitting. Let's say Treylon Burks ends up as a wide receiver 1, or Cortland Sutton hits the way you hope he will as a 9th-round pick. You could always then look at what the guy is dealing with that has the Jalen Hurts roster. He's got Jefferson, so that's good for him. But Pollard, maybe they re-sign Zeke and Pollard doesn't end up being worth it as a early 3rd-round pick. Maybe, Calvin Ridley doesn't pan out for whatever reason. Mike Williams is injury prone. Tyler Lockett I love, but he's getting older in age. Kadarius Toney, injury prone. A-Chain, high upside rookie, but maybe he doesn't get the playing time that you hope for. Like, this is a roster for Team 2 that when you go early QB, you become susceptible to being a roster that's not as deep, not as robust. I think I am much deeper at the RB wide receiver spots than Team 2. And so what happens if they get into the middle of the season and they love Jalen Hurts, but they don't feel like they can field the roster? They had too many injuries. They had underperforming players at different positions, and they're willing to trade you Jalen Hurts for whatever QB you get off of waivers because, Goff takes off and is more stable because of all the weapons there in Detroit. Or I pick up Matt Stafford, and he's looking like the Stafford of old, hooking up with Cooper Kupp. And so they say, hey, listen, I'll throw you one of these fine quarterbacks that'll not be anything close to Jalen Hurts, but they'll get you points. And I'm going to give you, Deebo Samuel and Antonio Gibson, who happened to hit. I'm going to give you 3 good players to help you fill out your roster. Sauce me that Jalen Hurts share, and suddenly I am all in on the Eagles because I can stack it with A.J. Brown and DeAndre Swift. Like, those are the kinds of moves you look for, and that's why I build the roster this way, because I find it's always easier to trade for the premier quarterbacks and the premier tight ends later in the season if you stock up at RB and wide receiver. Now, will all these guys hit? Treylon Burks, Gibson, Sutton, Kendre Miller, Sky Moore off my bench? No, probably not. But I feel pretty good about 3 of the 5 ending up pretty fantasy relevant. And I think with what we have at wide receiver and Brown, Debo, DJ Moore, and Godwin and Debo a little bit injury prone. I could see that. But I just think there's enough there. There's enough depth that I should be able to pull off some trades to address quarterback and tight end later in the season for those rosters that thought they would be able to manage it, but they might find out that the injury bug bites them and I can swoop in and take advantage. So I'm not in love with the starting lineup, but I think I have enough name value type of guys that they could be traded for players I do like even better at fair value later on. So I like the way this roster sets up. We'll start A.J. Brown, Debo Samuel, DJ Moore, Chris Godwin. at wide receiver in our flexes. And then we'll look for some of these guys like Burks, Gibson, Sutton to take off, to maybe rise above their station and their draft position. And then Kendre Miller is a nice flyer on a rookie. I don't have as many rookies as I normally like to have. I love to stack my bench with rookies. It just didn't pan out this way this time. But I like this draft. Let me know what you think of it. And let me know what you think you'd like to see from this channel moving forward in terms of the types of mocks that we can do. I want to be doing as many of these as I can throughout July. People will really start to get into it in August. And we'll start to include some of the subscribers and the people viewing these videos. I'll advertise it on Twitter and on this YouTube page to say, hey, we're doing a mock. Does anybody want to be involved? And I would love to have people jump in. So let me know what you think of the content. Let me know what you'd like to see from this channel moving forward. And make sure you do subscribe as we get off the ground here for the 2023 fantasy football season. Thank you guys so much for joining. And we'll talk to you next time on Brenden Schaeffer Fantasy Football. Peace.